All right, so picking up where we left off here, we were talking about the animals that live in the desert, characteristics that they have to have. Okay, the biggest thing is that they've got to be tolerant to hot, dry conditions. And we said one of the adaptations for that is to be nocturnal. Of course, if you're going to be nocturnal, then you've got to have really good eyesight or use some other form of perception that will allow you to locate your prey. So if we're talking about snakes, they have some ability to sense heat. They have the extremely good sense of smell / taste with their tongue. Okay, bats would be another example who use echolocation to find their prey, kind of a form of sonar that lets them detect things, stuff like that. So there's lots of adaptations that would be required certainly to live in the desert. Being really big is generally not one of them. Of course, there are exceptions to that, like the camel. Okay, and we talked about that yesterday, how the hump is really not like a bucket of water. Okay, it's more like really fluid infused kind of lumpy tissue, okay, that actually can absorb a lot of their body heat so that the important organs of the body don't overheat excessively, whereas this lump of scar tissue can get kind of hot and not really be a big problem. All right, so basically the hump runs a fever so that the rest of the camel doesn't. All right, it's kind of how they help to cool themselves. All right, animals in the desert, subterranean or not? Subterranean meaning live underground. Yes, living underground in the desert is a good idea, all right? Because where else are you going to get cover? Like you can't. There's nowhere to hide, right? I mean, you can maybe find a pile of rocks or something, but for the most part, if you don't have a burrow, there's not really a place to hide in the desert. So there are a lot of subterranean animals, things like that. If you're a predator, or if you have predators, you want to make sure that your burrow is just big enough for you and not for the friend that might chase you into it. Okay, that's the advantage that like weasels have. All right, if you've ever seen a weasel chase a gopher, okay, weasels are long and skinny and they can go right down the hole behind the gopher. Okay, badgers on the other hand, just dig them out. Okay, badgers are way too big to fit in the hole, so they just wait for them to go down the hole and then they dig like crazy. Okay, they're like the ditch witch of the animal world, and they just extricate them very quickly. Right? So there's things you have to be able to adapt to in the desert, and obviously finding cover is one of them. If you're a rodent and there's hawks or eagles or something like that flying around, and birds are one of the main predators in the desert, you best have a hidey hole to get in real quick. Okay. All right. And then, of course, there's lots of insects. Many insects are quite tolerant to drought conditions because they've got that hard kind of carapace that goes over them. Okay, chemical cycling in the desert is very, very slow. In fact, most things don't decompose at all. They sort of dehydrate and then sit there, right? Because you got to have moisture for decomposition to occur. Yes, there's bugs and things like that, but once a carcass desiccates, that is, dries out completely, it's not all that appetizing to very many things. Okay? And there's not going to be fungus or anything like that that can grow on it because it's too dry for that. So decomposition is pretty slow to practically absent. Okay. Okay, now grasslands is our next one. Now you might look at that picture and go, Coder, you screwed up. You put the desert picture in there. Okay, because there's cactus everywhere. Okay, and it looks pretty dry. Well, the prairie is pretty dry. Okay, if you've ever been down like Medicine Hat or Lethbridge, okay, or places like that, that's temperate grassland, but it's dry. Okay, you go there in August and everything is just a golden color because it's already all kind of ripe and burnt. Okay, so yes, there's more moisture than the desert, but not a lot. Okay, just enough that you get grasses basically covering the surface, but not much else. You don't see a lot of trees. Okay, there might be little groves of trees here or there, but they'll be pretty sparse. Anything bigger than grass is usually like a sage, like a bush of some kind. Okay, it's a rather small biome compared to some of the other ones, only 7%, but it's a pretty important 7% because that's where we grow the majority of our food. Okay, is on the prairies. That's where agriculture can work the best. Which means, unfortunately, that a lot of prairie is not natural. Okay, especially here in Alberta, right? You go down, like I said, to Medicine Hat, Lethbridge, or around here, and you see, you know, a field that doesn't look like it has a crop in it. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's natural prairie. Okay, lots of times farmers will use land for pasturing their animals, but they will actually seed it with certain types of grass because those types of grass are more nutrient dense, okay, for their animals, right? So unfortunately, there's not a lot of natural prairie still hanging around in many places. All right, so grasslands experience significant soil moisture deficit due to long periods of drought in late summer and autumn. Okay, the stress associated with this probably prevents trees from growing in these areas, and then of course compared to savanna regions, conditions are often less favorable for plant growth because what do we have that the savanna doesn't? Yeah, winter. Okay, we get snow, it freezes, plants have to go dormant for much of the year. Okay, all right, so this is a climatogram for Calgary. Okay, gives you a pretty good idea of what a grassland biomes graph is going to look like. Okay, the bars look kind of high, but you got to remember that these are in millimeters. Okay, so this is 90 millimeters of rain in June, right? It's about that much. It's not a lot. Okay, it looks like a lot because of the scale of the graph. And you can see we have a pretty sharp bell curve as well, indicating that there's distinct seasonality. Okay, our lowest temperatures are between -5 and -10 on average by month. Okay, obviously the last week skews that average a little bit. Okay, but now we're back to normal. And then in the summertime, between 15 and 20 again on average. Okay, for our warmer months. All right, so the temperature graph and the precipitation bars tend to have the same pattern. They're both kind of bell curve shaped. Okay, that is, the winters are dry and cold, and the summers are warmer and wetter. Everybody with me there? All right, so vegetation. There are different kinds of prairie. We put them all in one category. Okay, we call them all temperate grasslands, but in many places of the world, prairie looks different, including Alberta. Okay, on the left-hand side here, this is near Empress, Alberta, which is about 45 minutes north of Medicine Hat. All right, taken in August. This is short grass prairie. Okay, aptly named. The grasses are about this long. Okay, when they're fully mature. Because if you get really, really tall, you lose a lot more water to photosynthesis. During photosynthesis, sorry. So you get shorter grasses, many different species of grasses. Same time of year, this is taken near St. Paul. Okay, St. Paul, Alberta is like a little bit northeast of Edmonton. Okay, still prairie, but obviously a lot greener and a lot longer grass. Okay, still prairie because the dominant species are grass, but different kinds of grass. All right, so we can have what are called long grass prairie and short grass prairie. Okay. Long grass prairie, obviously you're also going to see more trees, more groves of trees here and there, kind of heading into kind of parkland types of landscapes, as opposed to, this is like, going into Saskatchewan, where you can see from one side of the province to the other, okay, because there's nothing to block your view in between. Okay, everyone follow me on that? Okay, you could watch your dog run away for a week. I could do this all day. I got all kinds of flat Saskatchewan jokes. Okay, so the short grass prairie's got stuff like spear grass, grama grass, things like that, whereas mixed grass or long grass prairie has wheatgrass, fescue. Okay, fescue is the stuff that actually we see a fair amount of it here growing in the ditch. Okay, so if you look beside the road in like July, you see that grass that looks like it's red on the top. Okay, that's a very common grass around here. It's called creeping red fescue, and it's one of the natural prairie grasses that grows here, and it does very, very well. But you don't see it as much in deep southern Alberta, as opposed to up here where you see quite a bit of it. You can actually see some right there, the tops of the red seed beds there. Okay, all right. Soils in the prairie, we got nice thick A horizons. Okay, and we have nice thick A horizons because every year when the grass goes dormant, this stuff becomes thatch. That is, it does not grow again. The grass will grow again from the roots, but it will not grow from its previous tissue. Okay, so that stuff gets deposited and buried and decomposed slowly, but over time it starts to build up a thick organic A horizon, okay, that is really good for obviously growth. Okay, it's got lots of nutrients and stuff in it. Okay, the B horizon is quite small. Okay, and you probably noticed that if you ever dug a hole around here. Okay, you got some black topsoil, brownish topsoil, then you get the clay, but the clay isn't very thick, and then you're right into the rock after that. Okay. All right. pH of soils is fairly neutral. Okay, we don't have a lot of like really acidic minerals or really basic minerals. Generally, soils here would go more towards basic than they would acidic if they were not going to be neutral. Okay, and that would be because of either sandstone or limestone. Okay, which can be alkaline. Okay, we do have to be cautious about when we're using agriculture to produce food about tilling up our soil. Thinking even 20 years ago was when every once in a while you would just leave your land fallow, which means you wouldn't plant anything there. You'd till it and just leave it and kind of let it recover. But what would happen is if you get a heavy rain, you've tilled up all the roots and there's nothing to hold the soil down. Okay, so the soil could wash away very easily, or if it gets really dry, the wind will erode it, and you get the big dust clouds that you saw kind of during the 30s and the Depression, if you saw pictures of that ever. Okay, so agriculture has generally gone away from tilling up land and leaving it exposed. Most farmers use now what's called a zero-till method, which means you have a special seeding device that you pull behind the tractor that makes the rows, drops the seeds, and covers them up without having to till and leave it fallow ever. Okay, so it's kind of a more modern thinking on that. Now, if you keep farming an area, you grow a crop, you harvest it up, and you take it away, what are you taking out of the soil all the time? Yeah, you're taking the nutrients out. So if you want your soil to remain productive, what do you eventually have to start putting into it? Fertilizer. Yeah, okay, I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. In agriculture, you're eventually going to have to start putting stuff back in. Okay. If you have true organic farming, what true organic farmers will usually do, and often even non-organic farmers will do, is every once in a while they'll plant a crop that actually puts nutrients back into the soil. Okay, for example, field peas and beans have on their roots little nodules that contain bacteria that take nitrogen out of the air and put it into their roots. Well, once you harvest that crop, you leave the roots. No one eats the roots. Okay, so you leave them there, and all the nitrogen that was gathered in the roots decomposes, goes back into the soil. So it's a more natural way and involves using less fertilizer. And I mean, you still grew a crop and got something for it. I mean, beans and peas aren't worth as much as canola is. I mean, canola is a pretty high-priced crop, but it's also pretty hard on your land. It's very nutrient-intensive. Okay, canola is the stuff with the yellow flowers on it. Okay, fauna. Fauna is talking about animals. What do you not see in that picture? Animals. Here's the problem. The natural fauna of the prairies is pretty much gone. Okay, because we use the prairies for agriculture, we have essentially disrupted all the animal life and migration that was supposed to occur naturally. The biggest one being buffalo. Okay, buffalo used to roam Alberta in herds of tens of thousands. Okay, they were like a giant lawnmower. Okay? They would just, herds of them would come along and just take the prairie right down like a golf green. Okay, as they migrated through the province. Problem is settlers came over and saw these big animals with lots of meat on them and decided, hey, guns will kill those things and we can eat them. And unfortunately, buffalo aren't very smart. So they kind of went by the wayside because they were easy prey. And they had another problem. They ate the same food as the cattle and sheep and things like that farmers were, of course, trying to raise for their own food. So they got out-competed. They got eliminated because of that. Also, they're a migratory animal, and their migration routes were disrupted by things like fences and walls and roads and railways and things like that. So it really disrupted their migratory patterns. And again, buffalo aren't very smart. They kind of get penned in and they just sit there. And sometimes they would just sit there and starve to death. So it was a bad thing for them, okay? Which is why you hardly see them anymore. Basically, they're just on farms where they're raised for food. Okay? Wood Buffalo National Park used to have a whole herd of them, and then they got a wasting disease and they had to cull the entire herd. So there's not many left in nature for sure. You might see them in the national park. If you go to Elk Island National Park, they have a herd there. but it's pretty rare to see them. And they used to be the most dominant creature. Um, they're big and they're dangerous. Another reason they kind of got taken out. Okay, if you've ever been next to a buffalo, okay, like you think a cow, you stand next to a cow and you're like, that cow's kind of big. You stand next to a buffalo and you're like, that thing is huge. Okay, and they're very strong and they're pretty fast once they get going. Their eyes are on the sides of their head though. Okay, like most herbivores, their eyes are on the side of their head so that when they're eating, they can still see their predators. Okay, that's the reason they've evolved that way. The problem is they don't see cliffs coming if you get them running, and that's of course how the natives used to hunt them, right? Because they didn't before rifles and things like that came. You're not going to take down a buffalo with a spear or a bow and arrow, things like that. They're just too big. So they would just spook them. They would dress in like the fur of wolves and things like that, and they would spook them and get the whole herd running. And once you get the herd running, they put their heads down and they can see here, and they just run them off a cliff. Okay, if you've ever been to Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump, okay, that's one of the places they used to do that. Yeah, so they were unfortunately kind of easy to hunt and easy to take out that way, so that didn't work in their favor either. Other things that we don't see, wolves. Okay, wolves used to be on the prairie, but obviously they were a problem for farmers as well. They eat chickens and sheep and things like that, so they got eliminated as well. You hardly ever see wolves in the wild anymore. Foxes, pretty rare as well. Okay, you don't see a lot of them anymore. So there's a number of animals that really have been taken right off the map in terms of that. Other animals that have done very well, gophers. Okay, didn't hurt the gophers any. Okay, they're a pest, but they're not too harmful. Coyotes are pretty adaptable. They like gophers. Okay, so they were okay. The wolves basically went, like we said, because they were a challenge to the animals being raised, but also when you take out all the big prey animals like buffalo, there's not much left for them to eat. They're not going to survive by eating gophers. In fact, they're going to be kind of hard for them to catch. Okay, so things like that. We've eliminated a number of them just because the prairie's kind of artificial now, and we don't see a lot of that. Pronghorn, so antelope. Has anyone ever seen an antelope? Okay, we still have quite a few of those. The deer and the antelope have done okay. Antelopes typically live further south than here. They're more kind of around Lethbridge and into Montana. They're interesting in that they can live their whole life without drinking any water. Okay? They have an extremely efficient kidney, and they eat cactus. Okay? If you've ever seen one up close, their tongue and the inside of their mouth is not like ours. Ours is very soft. Theirs is like shoe leather. Okay? It's very tough. So they can just chomp down on a cactus and the thorns just break, and they don't penetrate into their gums and soft tissue of their mouth because they don't have any, and they can just eat the whole cactus and get lots of moisture out of that. So they're pretty well adapted to living in the dry conditions of the prairie. Okay. All right, questions on that? Right, so that's what natural prairie would have looked like. Okay, so chemical cycles, they're generally pretty productive, but they're slow. Again, there's a distinct winter period here that's going to slow the cycling down. There's also artificial inputs of nutrients in the forms of fertilizers, as well as the manure of our stock animals. Okay, so all of those kind of contribute some nutrients in that may or may not have been there normally, and that can sometimes cause contamination of water. Not always, but sometimes it can cause algae growth. They had an issue with that. I think it's Sylvan Lake this year. They had a big red algae bloom in the lake, and you couldn't even swim in it for a little while. And most of that is caused by the sudden input of a lot of runoff and fertilizer getting into the water, because obviously algae is a plant and it likes the same things that terrestrial plants like, so we have to be cautious of that. Okay, right. Okay, temperate, deciduous, broadleaf, evergreen, sclerphilous forest biomes. This is the chaparral one, okay, the Mediterranean one. It's many biomes in one. Okay, sorry, I said that wrong. I'm including the Mediterranean one in the temperate deciduous forest. Okay, so this is the temperate deciduous forest, but I've put in the Mediterranean one here. Sclerphilous forest, okay, is the other name for the Mediterranean chaparral climate. So you can see here, all of the trees, or essentially most of the trees, are of the deciduous nature, that is leafy, and they're going to lose their leaves in the fall. Right? So if you lose your leaves every fall, what are you always putting back into the soil? nutrients. Really nice cycle there. Okay, it's not like on the prairies. If you're harvesting, the crops, you're taking away a lot of nutrients. Nobody eats the leaves. Okay, no one goes around and collects all the leaves for anything. So that leaf litter gets in there and it holds moisture. Okay, because it kind of creates a cover over the soil that holds the moisture in. Of course, water and rain can fall on it and still trickle down and get in there. So it's a nice situation there that helps retain nutrients and moisture. Okay, about 9% of the world's land surface. One resource that we do look at these for is, what's that? Lumber, yeah. Not so much like construction type lumber because these tend to be soft wood types of trees, some of them. Some of them are hardwoods like oak and things like that. But we're also look at this for like pulp and paper. Okay, a lot of the softer woods are better for making pulp and paper products out of. Okay, now if you're looking at the climatogram here, it's definitely a bell curve. It's temperate, which means there's going to be seasonality, but the temperature is considerably warmer than the prairies. Okay, coldest months often do not drop below 0. Okay, now our temperate deciduous forest does in Canada, but it's a bit more mild in Ontario than it is here generally. And then you can see that the warmest months are a bit warmer than ours. Ours were like 15 to 20, and these are well into the mid-20s. Okay, so the bell curve is there, but it's shifted upwards and a little bit warmer. And what do you notice about the precipitation? It's pretty steady. Yeah, it's steady and it's reasonably high. Okay, I mean our wettest month here is 100 millimeters, but it's that month, and everything else is quite a bit lower than that. Okay, but for this, it's between like 40 and 65 pretty much all year round, including in the wintertime. And that's important if you're going to have tree growth. You've got to have a steady input of moisture. Okay, there's going to be a lot more diversity in these forests than there would be in forests in, let's say, like northern Alberta. Okay, because there's going to be more species of trees. Okay, so temperate forests are typically dominated by oak, beech, hickory, and smaller quantities of understory trees like birch, hazel, sycamore, and maple. Okay, obviously maple is kind of bigger here in the northern parts. It's a bit more cold tolerant. Okay, whereas oak, beech, and hickory tend to be a little bit further south. Okay. Broadleaf evergreen temperate forests are in more humid zones. Okay, those are going to be oak, magnolias, and palms. So that's kind of Mediterranean. Sclerphilous forests are in the Mediterranean as well. Okay, and they're going to have really drought-tolerant species like olives, sessile oak, and pine. Okay, now can you have pine trees or spruce trees that are deciduous? Yes, and we actually have some here. Okay, if you go into Kananaskis in the fall, it's really pretty because the tamaracks, the larch, are a deciduous spruce. Their needles turn a bright, fiery orange before they fall off. Okay, and they actually lose their needles every year, and they look really pretty when they're doing it. So there would be some of those trees that are like that, okay, in that Mediterranean climate as well. Okay. So tropical forest, there's layering. Okay, you can see there's kind of a lower kind of ground growth layer, and then there's a layer here, and then there's kind of taller trees that are the canopy. Okay, not as many layers as the tropical rainforest, but there's still going to be some. Okay. Okay, soil, we generally get what are called luvasolic, which I'll never ask you about, but luvasolic soils tend to be a little bit more acidic. Okay, because there's a lot of decomposition of the leaf litter going on, and that can create anaerobic conditions which produce acidity. Okay, it's like the same process that happens to you if you're, running really, really hard. You start getting that, that burning sensation in your muscles. Okay, because they're operating anaerobically. You're not giving them enough oxygen, so they're producing lactic acid. Okay, well, the same kind of thing goes on in soils. If it starts to run out of oxygen, the bacteria in the soils will go anaerobic and they'll start producing acidic byproducts. It's not a big deal, but it does interfere with the growth of some things. Okay, you may have noticed that underneath your spruce tree at home, nothing grows. Okay, and that's because it creates that kind of acidic nature. Okay, animals. So you've got some big game, okay, moose and elk and deer and things like that. Okay, you've also got lots of small rodents and squirrels and mice. Okay, and then When you've got small rodents, you've got smaller predators. When you've got bigger things, you've got bigger predators. So the temperate deciduous forest has a little bit of both. Okay, there are things like wolves and lynx, okay, that will prey on large prey, okay, or they'll prey on other predators. Okay, they'll eat things like weasels and foxes if they can get them. Okay, owls. Okay, owls are pretty good with picking off other birds or rodents. Okay, and then obviously birds will eat a lot of insects. Okay, and then the lynx, if it could get its hands on an owl, I suppose would eat it. I've never seen that happen. That would be a neat trick. Okay, because owls are actually pretty vicious. If you've ever encountered one, they're actually very strong, and you have to watch out for their wings. Same with geese. Okay, geese, if they get their wings going after you, they can break your bones if they hit you right. I find that a 2-iron works pretty good as a defense mechanism against angry geese. It's got a nice long reach. Yeah. Their necks are kind of long and fragile. Yes, actually, I used to work at a golf course, and we had this flock of geese, and I was mowing the grass beside the water hazard, and I spooked this goose, and it just came at me, and they hiss. Have you ever heard them hiss? When they get angry, they hiss like crazy, and it started snapping at me, and then it started moving its wings, and they move a lot of air. Like it was like, whew, I had more hair then, but it would go back, and it smacked me just with the tip right on the knee. I was like, oh, that really hurt, and then it started coming after me, and then I felt kind of bad after. But what do you do? It was me or him. Okay. Yeah, so we got lots of different types of predators. Unfortunately, a lot of these predators are desirable for their fur. Okay, and they tend to be a little bit endangered in most of these biomes. Okay, especially lynx. Lynx has really nice fur, and if you've ever seen someone walking around with a gray coat that's kind of got the lines of fur, that's probably what it's made out of. Okay? I'm not one of those I hate people who wear fur kind of people, but there's lots of really good synthetics out there. Anyway, that's my 2 bits on that. Okay. Okay, chemical cycling, it's not going to be like the rainforest because there's winter, and that's going to slow things down. There's also going to be slightly acidic conditions that are going to slow things down. So it's going to be faster than the prairie, faster than colder climates, but not as quick as tropical climates. All right, the taiga, or what we sometimes call the boreal forest. Okay, and that's what you get if you get up to Fort McMurray, okay, places like that, or you go into Banff, okay, or Jasper, or places like that, into the mountains, you're going to have the taiga. So we see it looks kind of like this. It's just that carpet of spruce and pine that kind of covers everything. About 9% of the Earth's land surface. It's relatively undisturbed because most of it is in the far north, okay, and it's very rugged terrain usually. Wildfires are a problem. I shouldn't say they're a problem. They happen often. They're also important. Okay, if the forests do not burn periodically, then you can get really severe fires that can be a really huge problem. And that's unfortunately a lesson that was learned the hard way by Parks Canada in about 2003. Sorry, they had really bad fires in Jasper that year. It was hot and it was really dry, and they'd been putting out forest fires in those national parks for 100 years. And all that does is lead to the buildup of a lot of really old, sick trees and a lot of deadfall on the ground. And all of that gets really dry and it burns really fast. So once it gets going, you can't stop it. And they lost a lot of forest because of that. So now what they do is they actually have controlled burns once in a while. Okay? They allow for, this area is going to burn. We're going to go and start a fire over there intentionally because that forest is starting to get old and sick. They had the same problem in Kananaskis a few years ago. They had been putting out fires for a long time, and the trees got old and sick, and they got pine beetle. Okay, and that was really bad because that can spread to healthy trees afterwards. So it's important that you allow nature to take its course, and when there's going to be a forest fire, you kind of got to let it go. Okay? It's part of how the nutrients get cycled and how the younger trees can be reseeded. A lot of those trees won't seed until their cones are burned. They're covered in a layer of resin. When they fall off, they're just sealed up. And that resin burns away in a fire, and the pine cone will then crack open, and then the seeds will be released. But until they're exposed to high heat, they won't reseed themselves. Okay? So it's important to allow those fires to happen. Now, lots of resources, obviously lumber. Okay, lumber would be a big one because we like to use pine and spruce for construction grade lumber. And then obviously oil sands and coal and things like that can usually be found in here too. Now, these are actually, believe it or not, pretty dry forests. Most of the water is in the form of snowmelt. Okay, so they get lots of snow in the winter, and then when it melts in the spring, there's lots of runoff, and that's pretty much when the trees have got to get most of their water because they may or may not get a lot of rain during the summertime. Okay, some of the harshest temperatures in the world are recorded in the taiga, believe it or not, sometimes even colder than places like Antarctica. And the big thing about the taiga is it's got the biggest temperature swings of any biome. So everything that lives there has to be adapted to extreme cold and extreme heat. Okay? Because sometimes it can be 30 degrees in the taiga, and sometimes it can be minus 50. All right? How do you know if the temperatures drop below minus 50? What's the test? If you spit and you hear a crack, that means your spit froze before it hit the ground. That's how you can tell if it's minus 50. Okay? Hawk a big loogie, and if it freezes before it hits the ground, it's below minus 50. Okay? What's that? I learned it when I was in the Boy Scouts, actually. Yeah. Okay? And actually, they had a cool demo of it on the Weather Network the other day. Someone took a cup of tea and then they threw it over their head, and it froze into this big fan that they caught in a picture. Yeah, it looked really cool. But yeah, like imagine how cold it has to be to take something that's like 35 to 45 degrees and freeze it solid in under a second. Okay, it's got to be pretty cold, right? So yeah, you don't want any of your skin exposed when it's that cold. You get frostbite pretty fast. Okay, all right. So minus 45 to minus 50, and it can stay there for long periods of time. So if we're looking at the climatogram, there's a bell curve, but look how low it is. Okay, our bell curve was kind of up here. Okay, this bell curve has dropped a lot lower. Warmest month is between 10 and 15. Coldest month, minus 25 to minus 30. And rainfall, okay, is steadier. I mean, there's definitely a little bit of a bump here where it gets higher in August and September, okay, but in general, it's below 50 millimeters of rain a month. That's that much, okay? So that's not very much rain. These plants are pretty drought tolerant. Okay, vegetation, not diverse at all. Okay, there's things like lichens, okay, black spruce, white spruce, larch, grasses, a few kind of undergrowth types of bushes that might grow, like buffalo berry and things like that. Bears really like the buffalo berry, so if you see little red berries on the bushes when you're in the mountains, be on the lookout because the bears really love to eat that stuff. Okay, grizzly bears especially, they just grab like the whole bush and they just run it through their teeth, and the berries come off, and they just love them. Okay, you can always tell because that's what bear scat's got in it all the time. Okay. People know what bear scat looks like, right? Bears have really runny poop because they eat lots of berries. By the way, bears stink real bad. Anyone been close to a bear before? They stink. Okay, like they stink like dead things. Okay, because they like to roll around in dead things. But they stink really, really bad. If you're ever close to one, you'll know. Okay, not because you'll see it, but because you'll be able to smell it. Okay, my dad and I, we got one. We walked into our campsite one night when we were backpacking, peed on our tent. That was one of the most frightening experiences of my life. And like, because I woke up because of this smell, not because of a sound or anything, but the smell of this bear woke me up. Oh, I elbow my dad. Dad, you smell that? It's like, shh. I'm like, what? That's a bear. And then you could hear this kind of grunting, and you could hear the pawing of his feet. And then on the rain fly. And that we had to throw that tent away. Like, if you think the bear smells bad, their urine is awful. Okay? Yeah, like we threw the tent in the river and tried to clean it as lost cause. Okay? So they're pretty stinky. Okay, soils in the taiga are cold. Obviously, they've got long winters there, so there's going to be some permafrost, which means that the soil may not thaw very far down, and oftentimes the soils are very young, which means the parent material, the sea horizon, might be a lot closer to the surface than this diagram would indicate. Okay. Now the animals. Okay, so we were talking about bears there a minute ago. Okay, the animals are a big part of the taiga. They have to be very adaptable. That is, if they're going to stay in the taiga, They have to be able to survive extreme cold as well as extreme heat in the summer. Okay, so if you can't do that, what's your choice? If you're not going to stay, you're going to go. So you could migrate. And lots of animals in the taiga migrate, especially birds. Okay, geese and things like that are going to take off for the winter. But other animals will go dormant. Okay, like gophers and squirrels. Okay, they are true kind of hibernators. They'll pack all their seeds in their burrow and whatever, and then in the wintertime they kind of go to sleep, but it's not really a true sleep. They lower their metabolism to the point where their heart beats only a couple of times a minute. They breathe maybe once a minute, twice a minute. Okay, if you were to pick one up, it would like be a cold, stiff ball. Okay, when you pick it up, that's their adaptation to the long winter. Is why waste all my energy fighting the cold if I can just lower my body temperature and essentially go into dormancy or stasis for a few months. Now they wake up periodically and they eat a little bit more in their burrow. Okay, when they wake up, the first thing they got to do is like shiver for about a half an hour. All right. You imagine if your body temperature was 5 to 10 degrees Celsius. Okay, you probably wouldn't feel very good, and you would shiver like crazy. Shivering makes you burn a lot of calories, though. So they put on a big store of fat. Okay, during the winter months when they're eating all those seeds. Okay, and that allows them to do that. Get up, eat a little bit more, and then go back to sleep. So we talked about there's lots of big animals in the taiga. Okay, we talked about the bears already. Okay, and obviously there's grizzly bears and black bears, and there's these little guys. What is this? It's a wolverine. Yeah. Okay. There's a reason that one of the X-Men is named after them. Okay, and that he has big claws, because so do they. Okay, and they're vicious. Imagine all the anger and intensity of a grizzly bear packed into something the size of a German Shepherd. Okay, that's a wolverine. Okay, they can take down really big prey just because they're that vicious, and they're very strong, and they're pretty quick. They can climb trees, obviously. Okay, so they're very nimble. Okay, grizzly bears are pretty nimble too, but they can only climb certain trees because they're kind of heavy, right? They're not going to climb a skinny dead tree because they'll fall off and it'll break. Okay, but they can do that. Now, other animals, the ones that hibernate, okay, some of the ones that don't hibernate, use the insulating quality of snow. Okay, they're going to hold the snow, they're going to burrow into the snow, and because the snow's got lots of air spaces, it acts like insulation. We talked about that in the second lesson of this unit. Okay, so they're able to, okay, get the temperature inside their burrows above the freezing mark. It'll create kind of a layer of ice, and then that's it. It'll just kind of stay that way, and it won't leak on them. Okay, and that'll keep them warm. They just stay underneath there. Problem is, anything that compacts the snow removes the insulative value of it. Okay, so if a snowmobile or something like that goes along and presses down the snow, it pushes out all the air, and then it doesn't insulate anymore. Okay, it's a very poor insulator at that point. An igloo, as an example, an igloo is actually not a very warm shelter. It's just a shelter from the wind, because you make an igloo out of blocks of ice, and there's not a lot of air spaces in the ice blocks. So it's not as warm as a quinzhee is, okay, which is made out of piled snow. All right, light levels. Because the taiga is so far north, light changes obviously between winter and summer, right? Some parts of the taiga would get in the wintertime 4 hours of daylight, but in the summertime 20 hours of daylight. So that makes it an important cue for animals for when do I migrate, when's my mating season, when do I need to really start eating or packing away a lot of food. All of that is cued by light, okay? Because they don't know what month it is or what time of the day it is or anything like that. They got to go by light, okay? So mating seasons are often triggered by light levels. You want to have your young when it's going to be when the days are getting longer, okay? And there's going to be more food for them. Okay, chemical cycling, super slow, cold all the time, okay? Dry. So it's not going to be something that's going to happen quickly. So when a tree falls down, it's going to stay there for years and years and years before it breaks down. Okay, Arctic and Alpine tundra. Okay? Arctic and Alpine tundra is an Arctic grassland, and the grasses are typically pretty short. Okay? Now, what do you see in this picture? Snow. July 6th. Okay, there's still a lot of snow. Right? There's basically snow all year round. Okay, yes, parts of it will melt and expose the plants and they'll grow, but they got to grow fast. Okay, if we're talking about Arctic tundra, that's not really a problem. They can grow fast because they're getting lots of what? Sun, 24 hours of it. Okay, plants they can have a really short life cycle if they're getting 24 hours of sunlight for close to a month. Okay, so they have short life cycles. They can get to the blooming phase quickly because they're constantly carrying out photosynthesis. Okay, but they got to do it because the snow can fly as early as September and then cover them for the winter. Okay, so they got stuff like that. Now a climatogram for that. Okay, steep bell curve. And that bell curve is very low on the temperature scale. Okay, temperatures over here. Warmest months are between 5 and 10 degrees. Okay, coldest months into the minuses big time. And precipitation. Okay, we can see here the scale is a little bit skewed, but our wettest month is 60 millimeters. Okay, and the rain tends to follow the temperature curve. All right, our wettest months in the tundra tend to be July, August, September. Right, those will be our wettest months, but wet is still only 60 millimeters of rain, so not much. Okay, still a fairly dry place. And you got to remember that even though it may get lots and lots of snow, snow doesn't have that much moisture in it. Melting 10 centimeters of snow produces 1 centimeter of water, okay, on average. Okay, vegetation, tundra means treeless. That's what the word means. There aren't any. The soils are not deep enough or they don't thaw far enough to support deep root systems, so you only get things with shallow roots like grass. Okay. Again, this is a picture of Alpine tundra this time as opposed to Arctic, so Alpine means up in the mountains, and this is taken around the same time. It would have been early July, first week of July. Okay. And you can still see there's lots of snow. All right, that's it. That's all you got to know. Okay, that's all the biomes. Questions on any of that? Yep, so one of the ways there's two ways I'll ask you about the biomes. A multiple choice question that has a description that would have bits and pieces of the stuff I've given you there and a picture. And I would say, which biome is this, A, B, C, or D? And on the written response, I'll give you a climatogram and I'll ask you, what biome does this come from? Explain why. Right, so if you saw one that had flat temperature line and a lot of precipitation and then none, you would say, no, rainforest is steady all year. Savanna, because it gets the monsoons and then it's drought after that. Okay, so you could say something like, this is clearly an equatorial climate because it's got a flat temperature line indicating there's no seasons. But because there isn't steady rainfall, a forest wouldn't develop here. There's clearly a wet and a dry season. That seems to go with the savanna. That would produce a grassland kind of thing. That would be how you kind of explain. Yeah? No, because I would put it in the description, right? I would say, in this biome there would be things like bison or deer, stuff like that. It'll be a little bit from each slide that you've seen there would be part of the description. So when you're doing your studying of this, I would pick out the things you think are most distinct to that biome, because that's what I'm going to do, okay, when I make up the questions, and maybe just highlight them, right? And then you'll know, okay, I should look for these particular things because no other biome seems to have that. Yeah? Okay. Okay, we're going to take some liquid water from the sinks and we're going to put it in a large beaker. Okay, so about a 600 ml beaker. So we're going to put 200 mils of water in that beaker. Oh, sorry. Then we're going to take a smaller beaker, we're going to go outside and fill it with snow, pack it. Okay, smaller beaker, just pack snow into it. Okay, come back in, and before you put the snow in, you're going to stir this water, put the thermometer in, take the temperature of the water. It's not going to be 0. It's going to be like 10 or 15 or maybe even 20 degrees Celsius. Okay? Then you're going to add the snow to the water and stir. Okay? Taking the temperature while you stir. Don't stir with the thermometer. They're not strong enough. People do that and then they snap. Okay? You'll have a stirring rod and you'll have the thermometer. So stir, okay, take the temperature, and as the temperature drops, okay, and that's what's gonna happen, the temperature will drop. Once the temperature stops dropping, which should be around what temperature? Around 0. It won't be exactly 0, but it'll be close. Once it stops moving, then take the stirring rod and the thermometer out and start scooping out any remaining snow. Okay, any snow that's left in there, you gotta scoop it out and try and keep all of the water in, right? So don't be like splashy. Okay, reach in there, grab it, give it a squeeze, and then put it in the sink, okay, and keep all the water that's left. Everyone follow me so far? Okay, because what we'll have done is we'll have cooled this water down from whatever its initial temperature was to 0. Well, we'll be able to figure out how much water, or sorry, how much energy it's lost. Yes, because we know we have 200 milliliters of it, which is 200 grams. Okay, and we know that it's water, and we'll know how much its temperature has changed by. Okay, so we'll be able to calculate how much energy was lost by the water. What did that energy do? Okay, so it moved to the snow. What did it do to the snow? And the snow melted. Okay, so this energy here is going to be used to melt the snow. How do we calculate the energy used to melt snow? Okay, so we'll know this number by calculating how much energy the water lost. Everyone follow? This, okay, will be the amount of ice, okay, essentially that we lost, right? How are we going to get that number? How are we going to figure out how much ice melted? Right, we'll measure how much water we have after. Okay, if we had 200 to start with, we're going to have more than that. However much more we have is how much ice that was melted. So then we'll know M, and we'll be able to calculate LF. What should it come out to approximately? Yeah, 333. So if we're getting somewhere in that range, then we did this experiment right. It's not a hard experiment. You're going to put ice in the water, you're going to stir it till it stops changing temperature, pull it out, and record a couple of things. Okay, so the two things you need to record, you might just want to write this down or highlight it on there. Okay, final volume. Okay, you need final volume and you need initial and final temperatures. Okay, those are the two things that you need. Initial, or three things, sorry. Final volume, initial and final temperatures. Now, when you measure this 200 milliliters of water, okay, it's going to be somewhat accurate because the beakers have the measurements on the side, but they're not really accurate. Your procedure says use the graduated cylinders, but we're a little pressed for time. So we're just going to fill it till it says 200 mils on the side of the beaker. Okay? Everyone follow me on this. All right. So two members of your group are going to be responsible for collecting snow. I would suggest going out the doors at the back over here. Okay? Don't go out the kindergarten doors. Okay? Go out the back over here because you'll pass less classrooms going that way. I don't want you to walk down the science wing because then you're passing every single classroom in the science wing. Okay? Now, one person needs to hold the door because if you let the door close, you're going to be stuck out there. Okay? So one person's job is to let the other person in. Don't be mean. Okay? Let them in. Okay? They're going to collect snow. You're going to let them in. All right. Okay? Whatever your extra volume was after the 200, that's what you're going to use for M in E equals MLF. And you're going to solve for LF. Okay, you're going to calculate E using 200 times 4.2 times whatever your temperature change was, and then you're going to use that number for E because that energy that the water lost was used to melt the ice. Okay, it's a law of conservation of energy kind of thing. It has to go somewhere. Okay, then, like I said, you'll solve for LF by dividing both sides by M. All right, so let's put our numbers into that, try both trials and see what kind of numbers we get, and we'll see how accurate we were. Okay, so we had one group here who said that they got 343 joules per gram, okay, which is pretty good, right? If we're looking at like percent error on that, okay, we know that the accepted value is 333. Wow, that's weird. It's trippy. That's a completely different problem from physics yesterday. Okay, so we had 343 joules per gram, so the difference there is 10. Okay, if we go 10 divided by the actual number, whoop. Come on, divide. Okay, that's 3% error. Okay, that's excellent. Okay, so if we're getting numbers, you know, around, let's say even around like 300, okay, that's not bad. 300 to 360 is a pretty acceptable answer. How many groups are kind of within that range? Okay, so okay, generally that's pretty good. This lab is pretty foolproof, really. Okay, what are some things that might have interfered with our numbers? Yeah, when you're squeezing it out, some of it's melting in your hand. Okay, was the snow clean? Not really. I mean, when you looked at your melted water, it was pretty cloudy, right? Okay, because I mean, there's been some melt and stuff like that, so it's not perfectly clean water, and impurities will obviously change those numbers. All right. So it's just an activity to see, kind of look at that. Tomorrow, unit exam review. Okay, so make sure that you come with some questions to ask. I'll do my usual spiel, and then you'll have some time to work on that sheet. Thursday, your unit exam. Remember, Friday's the deadline for all overdue assignments if that applies to you. Okay.